Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CRM MVP podcast. I was thinking over the last couple of days, what makes a world-class solution architect? I think it was in part because I was reviewing the newly released, I guess, a couple of months old at this point, Microsoft, Dynamics 365 Power Platform Solution Architect courses and exam. I haven't taken it myself. I was just reviewing the content that was put together for Microsoft. And, I was trying to think can this training and this exam help someone become what I consider to be a world-class solution architect, meaning someone who I would trust with implementing a solution for a business that will, essentially provide business results the company expects. So when I think about, is there any way that we could essentially put together the training or put together the checklist of skills someone should have in order to be a great solution architect or be a world-class solution architect or to be the best solution architect in the world? One of the things that I think about that gave me the most value and that I would have to include it in kind of this checklist in which we are coming up, with who a world-class solution architect should be. There are a lot of things on that checklist that are not technical at all, that don't have anything to do with Dynamics 365 or the Power Platform. Obviously, I think that in order for you to be a world-class solution architect for Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform, you have to have world-class level of knowledge. Now, do you have to know everything about it? No, and we've talked about this extensively. There are episodes about the top 10 things solution architects shouldn't worry about. For example, if you haven't listened to that, go ahead and check it out. But I don't think that having the non-technical skills is debatable. It's something that you have to have if you're going to be an effective solution architect. And if you can make the argument that you can be a solution architect without having the business skills or the non-technical skills, then I don't think you're a solution architect. I don't think that you can call yourself a solution architect if you don't have those skills. And the skills that I'm talking about, the business skills that I'm talking about, come from a variety of ways. Number one is from implementing Dynamics a bunch of times and kind of learning from working with others and learning from the customers that you're working with. So yes, after you've done a few dozen implementations, you will gain all of that knowledge, all of that non-technical knowledge, and obviously the technical knowledge as well, because you'll be implementing the technology to create solutions. So you'll gain that too. But I think that the most important one that you will gain is the non-technical knowledge. That's something that you will gain by implementing Dynamics for working with different teams and different companies, especially if you work with companies in different industries. I think that will kind of show you how multiple companies run their business and what's important for them and what is, what would move the needle for them as a business. The other way that you can gain this information is by learning on your own, whether that is by attending classes or reading books or reading blogs or listening to podcasts or watching videos, whatever it is. I think that you have to put a lot of emphasis on, the non-technical training in order for you to be a super valuable asset and a senior solution architect, or at least a world-class solution architect. You have to speak business and technology in order to be successful at being a solution architect. Now, there are other things that are important, like, for example, change management. I think is super important that you know how users essentially adopt changes that are brought up into a company. So I think it would be really good for a solution architect to know that. And that's why I invested time on learning the ADKAR system from ProSci, because I thought it was super valuable. And then when you think about, for example, the business training that I've done in the past, I attended multi-day training about sales, just sales system, specifically Sandler sales training. I attended that not because I'm a salesperson or because I wanted to be better at selling, but because I wanted to learn how people sell and how they can be more successful. Now, I'm not advertising Sandler. I don't work for them. It doesn't matter if you take it or not. You can take, there's a bunch of other ones out there, but I took Sandler because I happened to work with a company that was using that. So I figure, look, I'll learn how they're doing it. And I'll gain some good skills and teach me how people sell. And since then, I've worked with a bunch of other companies that use other things, other models out there. And although they're not exactly like Sandler, it's still a model. It still follows kind of the same principles, and I get to leverage the things that I learn on that class, or in that training, in order to make Dynamics more effective as a sales tool for salespeople at the customer I'm working with. In other words, in another one that I went to a 5-day boot camp called Business Mastery from Tony Robbins, which a lot of people know about him. He's a motivational speaker and all of this stuff. He also does business training. He's a successful business person. And the business training that he does is for companies in any industry. So it's not just for manufacturing or financial services or whatever. It's for anyone in any industry, any size as well. At least that's how it was advertised. So I went and I did that boot camp. So I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of things that I learned on that boot camp that I use for my own business to make us better as a business. And it kind of helped me gain knowledge that I didn't have, for example, in the accounting side and things like that, which I always kind of tossed to the side, kind of like, I'll just let the accountant deal with that. It gave me kind of clarity on how they work and what they like to see and how numbers work and how you can move the needle and things like that. There were great conversations about mergers and acquisitions. There was a lot of really good stuff that I learned for my business, but more importantly, I think that I learned for the owners and the entrepreneurs that I work with on a regular basis, implementing Dynamics 365. I get to think like anyone else. Like in one of the sessions, for example, in one of the days, I sat right next to a guy who sold bicycles in, I think it was Huntington Beach or whatever it was in California. He just had a business that sold bikes. Super successful business, by the way, way bigger than mine. And I was really, really, really impressed. I think he had like 5 locations, doing great. Then I met some other people that I think they had a bakery or something like that, and I got to talk to them. So I talked to so many people while I was there, and I love that stuff. So those are the 2 trainings that I remember specifically that I took that had nothing to do with Dynamics 365, but that had helped me tremendously in my career as a solution architect. I also did leadership training because I wanted to learn how to lead people in projects, especially when you work with large teams. Really, really useful. I did training in San Diego with Jocko Willink and with Leif Babin, 2 Navy SEALs that wrote Extreme Ownership. So I did that training. I think it's helped me a lot over the years as well. And I've done other training outside of that for, again, a variety of reasons. But I think that if I have to think about the non-project related learning that I've done, by far the one that has caused the most impact in my career has been reading books. I'm not an avid reader. I'm not Joel Lindstrom reading 100 books in a year or anything like that. I like to read. I try to read 30 minutes a night right before I go to bed. I have a Kindle, which I bought, I think it was during Amazon Prime Day or whatever it was. It was like super cheap, and I decided to buy it, and I read books, not just about dynamics or business. I also read, about other stuff. Right now I'm reading actually the biography of Alexander Hamilton. Pretty cool stuff. But one of the books that I read a long time ago, and this was a suggestion from a solution architect that that was mentoring me essentially when I became a solution architect a long, long time ago, is a book that literally transformed the way I architect solutions. I think that if I look back at the first or second or third implementation I did as a solution architect, they were super technically sound solutions, but in terms of business impact, I don't think they were as good. And I don't know. I don't remain in contact with people I worked 10 years ago with, but I don't think that they're using either Dynamics, or at least for sure, I hope they're not using the solution I implemented. I mean, I hope they're still using Dynamics, but I hope someone else with way more skills than me and way more knowledge and business quotient, I guess if that's a word, they would come and help them out and get a better solution. So I wish I could have a crack at some of those solutions I implemented back in the day. So there are two books, and I always give these two books credit for literally changing my life in terms of being on the solution architect side, and in terms of the rest of my life, like outside of just work. And those two books are Negotiation Genius and businessThink. And today I wanted to go through businessThink. I wanted to go through that book that I read many, many years ago. I think I'd read it twice back in the day. And for a while, when I started Elevate Solutions, when I started the company in 2014, it was a required book for every employee. So every time I hire somebody, I would say, you have to read Negotiation Genius and you have to read businessThink. It was a requirement. And I would pay for it. I would say, I know that this will take you whatever it is, a month, whatever it is, and that's going to cost me a salary for a month, but it's that important. I think that is so important that you gain these skills as a functional consultant, as a solution architect, whatever it is. And the earlier you are in your career and you can gain these skills, the better. And for me, I was a functional consultant for a while. I was a technical lead for a while. And when I became a solution architect and I read this book, businessThink, is when I feel like everything changed for me. And I feel that I became a way much more effective solution architect because I had the technical knowledge, but I just didn't have the business side of it. So I want to review this book with you, and a word of caution or warning, I guess. I'm going to be doing a lot of reading. Now, I'm not going to be reading the whole book. There's over 200 pages in this book. I totally recommend everyone to read it. I think it's about $8 right now on Amazon. It's not an expensive book. I know that in some cases, people say like, oh, you can buy my book for $750 or whatever it is. No, this book is awesome, and it's less than $10 or maybe, less than $15, depending on where you live. Book has been out for a while. It was written by Dave Markham, Steve Smith, and Mahan Khalsa, I guess, is how you pronounce that name. But I went through the book and I wanted to, write down or I guess zone out some things that I wanted to cover. Specifically, I wanted to talk about the 8 rules for businessThink or business thinking. If you want to think about it in those terms, I want to talk about all those rules. And I also want to, I'm going to be rambling a lot. And the reason for that is as I read, because I didn't just read the whole book just for this episode, I'll be reading with you. I'll start remembering examples from projects and things that I've done. And I'm going to try to kind of connect the things on the book to things that happened to me as a Dynamics 365 consultant. Now, there's a ton of examples in the book. There's no way I can cover it all. I 100% recommend you guys to buy it and read it on your own or listen to it if there's an audiobook for it. I'm not really sure, but for sure, go ahead and check it out because there's so much good information in this. But the book was written for business people. It wasn't written for consulting. It wasn't written for Dynamics 365 or CRM or IT or anything like that. So everything I'm about to mention, you can extrapolate to your own situation. If you are a project manager, I think that when you hear me talk about these concepts and you hear me go through examples and how to tackle things, you can extrapolate that to your day-to-day operations. If you're a functional consultant or CRM administrator, if you are a business owner, an entrepreneur, I think you can learn these concepts and apply them to what you're doing. But essentially, again, I think that when I look at it from the point of a solution architect, these concepts are so impactful, and again, they have nothing to do with the technology. So that's what today is about. So again, I'm going to be reading a lot, and I'm going to be rambling about experiences and things that I have kind of gone through over the years. Now, there are some things that I want to mention as well, within the book, and that is that. There are some concepts in here that will apply to different areas of a project. So if you're a solution architect, for example, I think that the whole book is probably written, I would say, on the pre-sale side. So it's all about like, how do you know, number one, that you need a solution. Number two, what solution you actually need. Number three, who's the right people that should be involved. So they talk about all of that. So I would say if you read the whole book, it's everything that happens before the project starts. But even after the project starts, I think that it's important that you understand these rules because they'll help you tremendously get the most value out of it. And I think if there's a constant theme about this book, to me at least, is learning how to speak to people. learning how to gather intel, learning how to understand, for example, what they really want or what they really are expecting, rather than taking the first answer. And again, I'll give you a ton of examples as we cover the book on, things like that, on situations like that. Now, before we start, I just want to mention that if you're a solution architect and you're working with business leadership at one of your customers, or you're working directly with the owner of the company or the CEO, which happens a lot if you work with small and medium-sized businesses, I just want to mention kind of, one thing that they open the book with. It's a few pages in, but they highlight it in kind of really, big, bold letters. And this is something that I always keep in mind, and I want you guys to keep in mind as you work in your projects and you work with your customers. And that is, and I quote from businessThink, says, "Real entrepreneurs never let money out the door for any reason that doesn't strictly advance the business of the company." All right? So I'll repeat that. Real entrepreneurs never let money out the door for any reason that does not strictly advance the business of the company. Now, why did I mention that to start the book? Why am I so focused on, understanding that, real entrepreneurs don't let any money out that is not going to advance the business? That is because I've seen it so many times with solution architects out there, with partners out there, even people that I've worked with in the past, even myself, before I changed the way I did things. I've seen it so many times in the past that we take this one thing for granted, right? That we kind of forget, I don't know why, forget that the solution that you're implementing is for the advancement of the business. That is the final outcome. That is exactly what, the leadership of the company, the owners of the company, the shareholders, however you see it, depending on the customer you're working with, that is why they're investing their time and money and effort to get this thing implemented. In a lot of cases, solution architects will say, well, no, this solution is really to, enhance the AI for the products, whatever it is. Like, that is not the final mission of it. The final mission of it is to advance the business, right? If they're investing time and money on it, it's always it's always as an investment. It's always with an expectation that it will return as better business for the company. So I want you guys to keep that in mind as we start this book and throughout your whole implementation. I'm always thinking, as an entrepreneur, as I work with customers, I'm always thinking, like, if I was the CEO of this company, or if I was the manager of this group, or if I was the general manager of this office, how would I advance this office, this business, this team, this whatever, because that will make you think better about the solutions that you're about to implement. And not only that, but it will make you think better about the things that you could have potentially suggested that are not going to cause the business to advance. And anything that you do in those terms, that any solution that you implement that is not really benefiting the business, you're going to struggle with user adoption, and ultimately it's your fault that you're implementing a solution that is ineffective. So let's start talking about the rules. Let's start talking about, what are the rules of businessThink and how they apply to solution architects. So rule number one of 8, check your ego at the door. All right. So rule number 1 is check your ego at the door. And I'm going to quote from the book. "Many believe that ego is indispensable in order to survive in the ruthless, unforgiving business world." In our case, the solution architecture world, or the Dynamics 365 partners world, however you want to see it. Back to the book. "It's not unusual to see business people operating on ideas like eat or be eaten, do or die, step on anyone in your way. Success seems to be the entitlement that only the aggressive enjoy. In business, bravado inherits the earth." Again, you need to extrapolate this to solution architect, or if you want to think about your customers, this is how some of your customers may think. So it's important that you understand that. Back to the book. "In direct contrast to those beliefs, the one thing we see that shuts down people and companies more than anything else is ego." We're not talking about the healthy kind of ego, by the way. "Arrogance consumes everything and everyone in its path. Ego has no pleasure other than in superiority over others. Superiority over others, their ideas, worth, position, and value. Likewise, egotism plays a zero-sum game and shuts down possibility. Ego relentlessly seeks comparison and gains satisfaction only by having more than another. Ego is under the delusion it is always right because it pretends to know everything, especially more than anyone else. Nobody knows everything. And I'm going to stop right there to repeat that. Nobody knows everything. That is the one thing you need to keep in mind as a solution architect, even if you know that you're the most knowledgeable resource in terms of Dynamics 365 or Power Apps or whatever it is you're doing, development, project management. It doesn't matter, what is your expertise. Even if you know that you're the most qualified or skilled resource in that specific area, within the project, the reality is that the project has a ton of different moving parts and nobody knows everything. Back to the book. Nobody knows everything they need to know to make crucial decisions in something as complex as business. Making the right decision requires important information and clear thinking from colleagues. You can't get relevant information or the best thinking from colleagues if they check out when they are crowded by your arrogance, defensiveness, or fear. And if you get less relevant information and only thinking that helps everyone feel safe, your potential to succeed will be shut down. I mean, how valuable is that? It's super, super important that we understand that principle. Checking your ego at the door. The interesting thing about ego is that it can actually convert strengths or personal strengths, I will say, in your character into weaknesses. For example, personal strengths like having confidence can become a sense of infallibility. Personal strengths like, sharp wit or alertness or dedication can be converted into workaholism, for example, when it's crossed or multiplied by ego. Things like control, which is great if you're a person that can assume control and take over a situation, multiplied by ego can become inflexibility, where you don't let anyone do anything. You're not willing to, let anyone take over and kind of lead a piece of the project or whatever it is. You want to micromanage. You want to control what everybody's doing to a point that you're inflexible. Things like perseverance multiplied by ego can become resistant to change. You don't want to change anything. You're very inflexible on that as well. Things like charm can become manipulation. So your strengths can actually become weaknesses when they're multiplied by ego. Back to the book. To compound the complexity of ego, people who have the biggest problems with it often don't think they have a problem with ego. While they may or may not be addicted to ego, they also don't recognize the signs when they are little doped up. Here are some key warning signs we've noticed that indicate someone is in the ego zone. Number 1, you're showcasing your brilliance. Number 2, you're consistently seeking approval from others. And number 3, when you're being defensive. If you find yourself constantly doing these 3 things, showcasing your brilliance, and you're thinking to yourself like, wow, this is going to blow them away, right? If you're constantly thinking that way, followed by a connection from showing them how brilliant you are to seeking their approval, and then connecting that further to being defensive if they try to question your decisions or your solution or whatever it is. Those are clear indications that you are on that ego zone. And the ego zone is kind of it comes from self-absorption. So let's get back to the book and take a look at this. When showcasing your brilliance, ironically, you lose credibility. Your brilliance, if it really exists, is lost in a cloud of self-absorption. People stop seeing the brilliance and notice only the arrogance. People get more hung up on your demonstrations than they do on the strengths and weaknesses of your ideas. The sad thing is that even when the thinking is really brilliant, people ignore it because they want to shut you down. We talked about this on the last episode. of the CRM MVP podcast when we talked about people who are entitled, right? MVPs and others who are entitled because they have, whether it is many years of experience or whether it is, they wrote a book about it, or whether it is they're multiple time MVP on the subject, whatever it is, people feel entitled and they are outspoken about it. And I told a story about an MVP who expected to be selected as a speaker at a conference just because it was me. Like, hey man, it's me. Look at my name. Look who I am. How can you not pick me as the speaker of the conference, right? We talked about that on the last episode. I don't want to dig too much into it because we kind of, went over that. But, when you see that, like I personally, because I witnessed that in person, I know, as I mentioned on the last episode, that I don't really pay attention anymore to the ideas and suggestions and achievements even from this individual because of the way they carry themselves, when I saw it personally. So that is what we're talking about. People ignore them because they just want to shut you down. And that is totally true. Back to the book. When your ego is revved up, there's a natural tendency to nosedive into the deep, so you think, recesses of your brilliance when someone identifies a business concern. You think to yourself, I'm a mile ahead of them. They need my expertise. I'll weave my magic wand and fix them, right? You quickly formulate some response, usually a lecture, while they are talking to you, means that you're not listening. And as soon as they take a breath, you jump in and start telling them what you think they need. We are all guilty of having done this at some time, or perhaps many times. As you listen to the words of your own suggestions, your internal smile widens and you acknowledge how bright you are. You got brilliance, baby. And if you haven't dazzled them with your genius yet, there's more where that came from. How many times have you guys done that? Like, I think this is something that we all have in common. Sometimes when you're working on a project or whether you're working at home or whatever it is, in life, someone starts talking about something and your brain immediately starts formulating a solution to the point where you stop listening to what the other person is saying because you already know what you're going to say. And you either interrupt them to say whatever you need to say, or you wait until they're done, like whatever it is that they're saying, so you can jump in and dazzle them with your brilliance, like the book says. Back to the book. Are you giving good advice when you stuff them, with your self-defined brilliance? Who knows? If all you do is tell your colleagues what they should do, showcasing your brilliance carries with it the risk of serious downsides. And here is something very, very valuable. So if you're taking notes, this is great. Once again, when you feel, when your ego takes over and you feel that you're the only one who knows what's going on, you're the only one that has the answer, you're the only one that can do it right, and that's why your team needs to follow your lead and do what you say. There are a lot of risks with that approach. Let's talk about them. Number one, I know this is going to surprise you if you're an ego-driven individual, but you may be wrong if you can believe that. I mean, at least it's a statistical possibility that you may be wrong. So what if you just push your entire team to do something because you say, and you're, the face of this particular, system or project or whatever in your company, you just push them to do something and you may be wrong. I know it's hard to believe for an ego-driven person, but, they might be wrong. People may see you as arrogant when you say that this is the way, this is the only way, this is, that's it. No open for debate. We're going to do it this way. People may see you as arrogant. That is not a good thing. Number 3, you may get no buy-in or ownership from others, which could ensure failure. So, it's always interesting when people think that when they tell someone else to do, they believe that they're going to take it over and kind of invest the same amount of interest, and they're going to pursue it with the same amount of passion as if it was their own idea. That's why the idea of decentralized command is so valuable. It's because when you tell people what's your objective and let them figure out what's the best way to achieve it, if you trust them, if you know they have the skills to do it, they will work harder to make sure that it gets done. Even if their approach is wrong and they have to correct it, they will work harder and be more passionate just because they are the ones coming up with the ideas. Back to the book. You may get the blame if your idea or suggestion fails. And the worst part about it is when your idea or your suggestion is not being executed by you, is someone else is doing that. Especially if that person didn't really get behind your idea in the first place. You tell them, no, you go and do this, and then they do it and it doesn't work. They're not going to try to fix it. They're not passionate about it, right? Another one. Your team may talk only about the ideas you tell them about and potentially leave many ideas on the table unexplored. That is true. If you're the one saying, I've done this a million times, this is how we're going to do it, no debate, no margin for debate, then people who may have ideas who may be good or bad don't even mention them. So they go unexplored. And I think that's wrong. You start treating people like things and become efficient rather than effective with other human beings. I hate that. I hate feeling that way. I hate feeling like I'm part of a team where I'm just a thing, like a weapon that I just get used whenever I'm needed, or a thing to invoice hours with. I don't like that. And lastly, if a team member doesn't shut down entirely, they may start telling you only what you want to hear, right? Because they're involved on it, it's not their idea. You're forcing them to follow your vision, which is driven by ego. If they already see you as an arrogant person that, doesn't have their best interest in mind, they're just being used as things, they're just going to tell you what you want to hear. Yeah, I'm still working on that. Yeah, no, I'm going to make it happen. Yeah, no, absolutely. I worked on that yesterday, but I didn't send you an update. I'll send it to you later today. They'll just tell you what you want to hear rather than what you need to hear. All right? And when you combine that, and again, this is one of the traits that we talked about as the identifiers of you being on the ego zone, which is you're showcasing your brilliance by telling everyone to do, that goes hand in hand with desperately seeking for approval. And the problem with that sometimes is that when you're putting together a solution and you're desperately seeking for approval, what you end up with is something that we've talked about in a lot of different episodes in the past, which is being a whiteboard consultant. Right? You're asking people, what is it that you want me to do? And I'm going to make it happen. Regardless of whatever you ask, I'm going to go make it happen. So let's talk about this back in the book. With the ego-generated need for approval, you don't give the unvarnished truth, explore failure paths, or give your insider's perspective, often when it's needed most. You give people what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. Basically, you just accept whatever the wind is blowing around as long as approval of you is the outcome. This is how yes man and yes woman got their infamous start. There's often not much of a difference between an approval-seeking person and an obedient dog or a well-trained parrot. You may argue that simply accepting and obeying may be appropriate. What could possibly go wrong? If you're a whiteboard consultant, this is just me. If you're a whiteboard consultant and you're just asking the customer what they want and exactly what they want you make happen, you can sit back and be like, look, everything you asked for, I did. What can possibly go wrong? Really? Well, let's go through a list. The ideas you're blindly following could be wrong. And guess what? If they're wrong, if what the customer asked for, it's wrong, you will be the one that is going to get blamed for it. Why? Because you're supposed to be the expert, especially if you're the partner helping a customer implement dynamics. If you just sit back as a whiteboard consultant and you say, okay, Mr. Customer, what would you like me to do? And then you do it and it doesn't work. The company doesn't get the results they want. The users don't adopt the system. Do you think the customer is going to go back and be like, you know what, it's my fault? No, the customer is going to be like, this is not what I thought I was going to get. I hire you because you're an expert. I know that I asked for some things, but it's your job to keep me out of trouble. It's your fault. And a lot of these projects that have been done that way end up in lawsuits and partners being fired because they followed what the customer asked for blindly. Number 2, you are not adding any value or thought leadership, which is pretty much the main reason why a lot of customers hire partners or solution architects to begin with. They're hiring you because they want to see what value you will add and what expertise and thought leadership you will bring into this particular project. Number 3, you could leave many opportunities uncovered. If you're only doing what the customer asks for, your customer is not an expert in Dynamics or Power Platform or whatever product you're implementing. That's what they're hiring you for. So because of that, they are not aware of all of the tools and benefits and features and functionality and third parties even that may be out there that would add a lot of value to their business. Number 4, you could lose the respect of those who courageously share their perspective and the respect of those who need your opinion. You're not giving your opinion. You're just doing what the customer is asking for as a whiteboard consultant. Yes, you're invoicing a lot of hours. I get that. It's a lucrative business to just do what the customer says, because then you can go back and say, well, I told you, I did what you said. You hired us to do this, and that's, I didn't agree, but you told me to do it. Like, you will lose respect immediately. I mean, honestly, there's people out there who are MVPs, who are, they make a lot of money doing whatever they do, that I have no respect for, because this is the approach they take. And it doesn't matter. Like, are we going to say they're not successful? No. If you think about their lifestyle, if you think about, the how solid their careers are or whatever, you could say they're successful. But if I look at it from a perspective of a solution architect, I would say they're a failure. Just like I would say I was a failure a few years ago when I got started and I thought this way. Mr. Customer, what is it that you want me to do? I'm going to do it. Oh, it didn't work. The user adoption didn't take. Oh, well, I did my job. No, I look back at my old days and I would say I was a failure as a solution architect. I have no problem admitting that. And I've worked hard over the last, 10 years or whatever to fix that. So that is a problem. And lastly on the list, which is, what's going to happen undoubtedly, is you could get labeled as a whiteboard consultant, labeled as a guy who, is a one-trick pony. You know how to do everything on the solution, but beyond that, there's nothing you can do or no value that you add, and sometimes I worry a little bit, especially, at pieces within projects where we're just doing a bunch of work, especially if you are doing, let's say, a migration. I'm just going to use an example, a migration from on-prem to online, let's just say, for Dynamics 365. When you do that and the customer already has a solution that works for them, there's not a whole lot of solution architecting that you're doing. You're just transferring from one environment to another, whether you're using the fast path or whatever, the fast track team, or you're doing the data migration yourself. Whatever it is, you're just doing a lot of work, but not adding a lot of value. You're just adding your own skills and making sure you will be transferring one environment to the next. And I worry sometimes that I'll be seen as, a technical guy that just knows how to do Dynamics and he does it very well and very fast. Whereas I know I can add a lot more value and advice and thought leadership, to the organization. So if all you do is just be a one-trick technical pony and that's all you want to do, for sure, you will be labeled, and that's essentially your position going forward. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is getting defensive, right? That is another way that you can spot whether you are on the ego zone, right? Back to the book. When you're defensive, you don't treat your ideas as testable hypotheses, but as facts to be secure and validated. You dig for evidence with the intent of proving your point rather than discovering the point. How many of you have been in a position where you suggest a solution and then somebody else brings something up and you're like, well, no, we'll, and then you go fight, right? You will defend it till the end. You will say, no, this is the way it is. Doesn't matter what it is. Like, I've seen people, for example, in the past suggest things, and they're not MVPs, for example, and they will suggest we use a feature that I know is going to be deprecated. And sometimes even without the MVP thing, it's a public thing. Microsoft says we're going to deprecate. Let's say the UI, for example, the unified interface, depending on when you're listening to this. I'm recording this in April of 2020, but Microsoft announced like a year ago, maybe longer, that the unified interface was going to be the interface come October 2020. And sometimes, you will work in a project, like last year, for example, where I was working, with another company, another solution architect, and he was trying to do all the work on the old interface. Why? Because there were some features on the unified interface that were not available. So they said, instead of waiting for them, let's just implement the classic UI. And then I said, well, but the classic UI is going to go away about 18 months from now or 16 months from now, whatever it was at that point. And at that point, what just became was a, defensive position. Like, we're going to do it in this one, later on, it might be easier to translate the code, blah, blah, blah. Like, it was just that back and forward. I'm so glad that we were able to implement on the classic UI and use some PCF controls and some other stuff that allowed us to implement the solution, and now that customer is ready. They don't have to worry about converting from classic to the unified interface. So that's important. All right, back to the book. Instead of asking other people, you ask yourself, when you do ask others and their answers don't jive with yours, you discount their answers and somehow insufficient or not applicable, or you find some special cause that will make them irrelevant. To give up on your idea or viewpoint would be a major sign of weakness. You feel, and this is me talking, you feel that if somehow you made a suggestion and now that suggestion is, I don't want to say proven wrong, but somebody brought something up that make your suggestion not as strong as you thought it was. If you think that going back and being like, okay, you know what, that suggestion is probably dumb, or it didn't work, or you know what, you're right about that, you feel for some reason that doing that is a sign of weakness, and I have never worried about that. As a matter of fact, if you are a subscriber to our YouTube channel, number one, thank you for doing that, CRM MVP Media on YouTube. But number two, we released a few episodes where I got together with 3 or 4 other MVPs that implement dynamics for a living, and we talked about Getting Naked, which is another book that I would like to review in the future here on the podcast. But Getting Naked talks about consulting, and one of the things, one of the rules in Getting Naked, or the principles in Getting Naked, is making dumb suggestions. And there's a ton of examples in the book. Like, for example, the guys are business consultants, the ones that wrote the book, and they were talking about a client where they couldn't figure out how to grow. They were struggling. They couldn't figure out how to break into the market. And then one of the consultants made a stupid suggestion. They said, you know what, why don't we just go public? Have you guys ever thought of that? And the owners or whatever of the company, it was a private company at a time, they looked at each other and be like, oh, what are you talking about? That's a stupid idea. Like, going public right now, that's crazy. They were like a brand new company. And like a year and a half later, they went public and the company's doing amazing, right? So it was a stupid suggestion that sounded like a stupid idea, and then it worked. Granted, you will make a ton of suggestions. It will literally be stupid, but it will never sound as weakness. For me, at least, when I work with people that make suggestions like that, even if they're ridiculous, quote unquote, like everybody says, I'm constantly thinking like, wow, this person is being an engineer or an architect, is trying to figure out the best way to do it. If you make 10 suggestions and none of them work, it doesn't matter. It's better than to be quiet or to suggest one thing that doesn't work and then defend it for an hour, trying to make it work, trying to fit it into the model. I never like that at all. And I don't think you making suggestions and then tracking back or taking them back is a sign of weakness whatsoever. All right, back to the book. You listen, but you resist what you hear. What are some of the downsides when you get defensive? Well, you don't get critical input to make your ideas better, right? People are like, okay, there's no point on talking to this guy. He's super defensive. I'm going to just pull back. Number 2, you repeat the same mistakes, especially when your suggestions come from multiple times you've done it in the past, and those times in the past didn't work as great. Number 3, people shut down around you and just leave you isolated. You know what? I'm not even gonna open my mouth. You do your own thing. They just shut down, right? You create defensiveness and divisiveness in others. Other people start being defensive against you. And this goes back to the whole idea of being a diva and saying that everything I suggest goes because I'm the, face of this particular solution or whatever it is. And number 5, attention is inappropriately shifted from the important issues at hand to people in their positions. We start paying attention at who said it, how they said it, are they right or not? Who said it? By the way, who is he? What does he do? Like, is he a solution architect or is he we need to focus on the problems and the issues at hand, and we don't need to worry about, people and their position within the company and whether they're being stubborn or ego is coming in. That is something that we don't need to worry about. Back to the book. The cure for ego, and I'm going to give you again the solutions as I introduce the problems. We'll talk about the solution, but the cure for ego is humility. The big H word. Contrary to popular belief, humility is not weakness. In fact, by our definition, humility is incredibly powerful. It is quiet strength and genuine confidence. tempered with graciousness. It is the we-centric, not me-centric, and deflects attention and credit rather than desperately grasping for it. Humility, quietly and consistently, produces extraordinary results and focuses on the future for a cause larger than self. That is so, so true. I've seen this so many times in different projects. And yeah, I mean, it's awesome. Humility, back to the book, adopts the principle of ignorance. Nobody knows everything about anything. You don't. Don't pretend you do. Neither does anyone else in the project. And I just added that, in the project. All of us may know a lot about something, but we don't know everything about anything. That's why you desperately need collaboration. Now, there are ways in which you can feed your ego, and the idea is that you don't feed it. You have to stay behind. If dealing with ego meant dealing only with your own, it would make the task a lot easier. Dealing with egos of others is the reality and can be equally difficult. The best way to manage another person's ego is not to feed it. For some reason, many people tend to believe that if you just stroke someone's ego, it will go away. I mean, come on, that's never going to happen, right? You need to deal with their ego through the absence of your own. Man, great stuff. So let's talk about, if you're in a project or if you're dealing with people within your organization or whatever it is that have a lot of ego, how do you neutralize ego when you see it? When you're in meetings, when you're doing one of those iteration meetings or whatever it is, scrum meetings, however you call them, depending on the methodology you use and how you do it, how do you deal with that? Back to the book about neutralizing ego. The language begins with a softening, and that is, quote unquote, lead-in statement that invites everyone to drop their figurative boxing gloves. It demonstrates your intent to create a neutral, safe place that removes egotistical responses. You are soft in how you deliver what you say while remaining direct and clear. This allows you to deal with the person in front of you kindly, directly, and with due respect, while simultaneously getting real on the issues at hand. Start first with what the other person said and explore it together. Don't go point to counterpoint with them or dazzle them with superior logic and brilliance. How many of you do this, by the way? I just got to stop because I've seen this so many times, right? You see people, they're listening intently, of someone who's arrogant or someone who's talking like they know everything. And the way they counter that is by trying to out-brilliance, the person with the ego, right? So that's not how you do it. So back to the book. Here are some examples of softening statements that we will build into the businessThink language. So a big part of this book, again, is learning how to talk to people. And here's how we start learning how we change the way we talk to people. I'm telling you guys, if you change the way you communicate, if you change the way you talk to people, you will not believe the results. And it's not just about, people are going to like you more or whatever it is. It's the people will open more. They'll let the guard down. They'll tell you exactly what they want to see or what they expect. And when they trust you and they open up, your solutions will be way more effective. Back to the book. Here's some examples of softening language. I appreciate your asking. When you say blah, 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 and you're clarifying, right? Another one. Thanks for bringing that up. Could I ask you, and so on and so forth, right? You finish the sentence from there. Another one. I hadn't even thought of that. If I could, let me ask you, and then you move on from that. Every time you say something, you want to start with a softening piece of language, not just a counterpoint directly. Here's another example. I'd like to answer that. Can you help me out by, and again, imagine a question, it's like, do you think we're going to deliver this in time? Do you think this is possible in 2 months to deliver in 30 days? Do you think we can train the whole company in 2 days? Whatever it is. Don't just immediately be like, yes, no, whatever, right? Just calm down, slow down, and say something like, that's a good point. Do you mind me asking? You're softening them. You're softening their, neutralizing their ego, I guess is the right word. So those are some examples that we're going to see throughout this book. One example of this one is, for example, I did a field service implementation last year where the field service technicians had to report their drive times. They had to say, we drove 30 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 15 minutes there, or whatever. And when I was meeting with leadership, not the actual techs, somebody came up with the idea of, I've seen that, some companies use GPS trackers in order to, make it easy for these reports, right? We're going to be able to just get the information directly from the cars. Our employees don't have to do it, and we get the information that we want. And, I said something like, that's a pretty interesting approach. I didn't really think of that until now, but that's definitely an option. Now, how about if you help me walk through, let's say, a day in the life of a tech, right? And then we started talking about, well, the day starts by them. They have to go to FedEx or whatever it is to pick up the parts that they need to do the job. Then from there, they have to go they have to go to the customer, unless there's multiple people. Right. So then I said, okay, so if there's multiple people working in a job, how do you report the time driving? How are we going to be able to connect them to the right work order? Right. And the time that they drove to get the part, does that count as part of the repair? So as you start digging into it, as you start asking the why, you will start identifying things, there might be kind of gaps in the solution. Something that might sound like a really good idea, you can explore it, but obviously by being tactful at first, right? Softening the kind of the questioning of it. Don't just automatically say like, well, that's too complicated. Who's going to sit, back at the office trying to match GPS times to particular work orders? That's impossible, right? You can't do it like that. You have to be smart and tactful in how you bring things up. Back to the book. People often share how they feel without any comparison to something else that people can measure it against. Here's an example of that. A colleague would say something like, consolidating all of our vendors and eliminating some is way too complicated. We just can't do it. Now, if you were not tactful, if you were approaching this as perhaps most people would do it, you would say something like, well, have you ever done this before? It's actually not that complicated. If we simply benchmark the competition according to the research, we will be able to reduce our costs while maintaining blah, 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 in my experience, blah, 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 right? That sounds something like that. It's immediate confrontation. It's immediate, like that, what you just said makes no sense. And I know a lot of different solution architects in the past, a lot of functional consultants that respond like that. And I feel that is always masked under the idea that, well, I'm just being straight up. I'm being genuine. I'm it's better to just bring it up and talk about it, right? If they're saying that it's impossible and we can do it, well, why not? Let's just have the conversation. But you can still raise your point without sounding like that. I'll give you an example of what it would sound like if you're tactful. If it is too complicated, that's probably not a good thing. That's a softening statement, right? If it's too complicated, that's probably not a good thing. What specifically seems to be the most complicated part, like compared to, whatever it is, right? So you are asking questions and probing for the same kind of answer rather than shutting it down immediately, rather than just saying, well, have you ever done this before? I mean, come on, it's not that hard. Let's not do that, right? People can share a belief that covers virtually everything. And again, this is all what we're talking about is more of a personal belief, right? And back to the book, the belief may be real in the mind of the person saying it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. To businessThink, you want to uncover the specific left out of the statement. So here's another example. Colleagues, the person says, our performance incentive program is a joke. Performance is never rewarded here. How many of you have heard something like that from a colleague before, right? And the problem is if you're addressing it, if this is something that happens in a project, again, if you're not tactful, you would sound something like this. Well, I think we actually do a pretty good job of rewarding performance. It just has to be the right performance, though. I don't think that they're ignoring your performance as much as you think. Maybe you just need to focus on the real, reasons for whatever it is. Like you sound something like that. It sounds combative, right? So changing the way you speak really, really helps you drive the point across. Here's how you would tackle that. If your performance isn't being rewarded, that needs to change. Now, out of curiosity, which performance isn't rewarded? Like for which things? Can you be more specific? Just try to probe the information rather than immediately being, aggressive, kind of in your way back of questioning. Back to the book. People often think in black and white. It's either this or that. Go or no go. If this, then that. That only thing missing is every other possibility on the planet. To businessThink, you'll ask them to explore other options. Here's another example. Your colleague says, this is a marketing issue, not a sales issue. How many times have you guys heard this on an actual project? I feel like I hear this thing like weekly, sometimes multiple times a week in different projects that I work on. I mean, for years, this always happens. All right, so back to the book. This is a marketing issue, not a sales issue. We're either going to improve product quality and upgrade our services, or we'll have to move to compete on price. Now, if you were old school, before you read this book, you would say something like, well, what you don't understand is that the product quality doesn't matter to customers in this market. Besides, our customer satisfaction index, blah, 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 blah. Like, right. You would immediately bring a counterpoint and argue against that. But the idea is that you're learning how to be more tactful. So instead of saying that, you will say, well, those may be our only 2 points that may make sense. Let's start with your definition of quality, or competing on price, or whatever it is, right? So ask the question, probing for information, right? We're probing for information. Back to the book. Sometimes people will share their belief in the language of absolutes, like all, or every, or never, or no one, everyone, things like that. To businessThink, you'll need to explore the exceptions. For example, and this is a good exercise. Imagine you're in a call center meeting talking about the latest customer satisfaction survey. And during the discussion, someone says something like this. Every one of our customers is screaming for us to be on the web. If they can shop online, our sales will take a dive. I've told them 1,000 times, so they never listen. Now you could chime in and join the party and say something like, idiots, I totally agree with you. They're so out of touch with what this company really needs. You can say something like that and, kind of add fuel to the fire. Or you can say something like, I've wondered about that myself. I wonder what would they have to be looking at that will lead them to ignore this kind of data. I mean, what kind of information could we get together that would give them, such a compelling business case that it would get them to pay attention, right? So it's a lot more constructive rather than destructive. It's about, converting that pain frame into a gain frame, right? And they talk about this in the book. To businessThink, back to the book, let's combine both frames and call it the reality frame. If someone asks whether the glass is half empty or half full, businessThink, like you guys listening to this and after you read the book, will say both. It's both. Let's not look exclusively through the one frame or the other. In creating the right exploratory environment for both, invite people to consider upsides and downsides, the pain and the gain. In this case, yielding the right of way to the frame is validating, and then examining the opposite side of frame opens them up to other alternative. This allows them to keep all of the upsides they like and reduce or possibly eliminate the downsides. So here's an example of that. The colleague. I absolutely don't like the idea of expanding globally when we're still in chaos here domestically. It makes no sense at all. Right? You hear statements like that in companies all over the world and in projects too. So if you were old school, before you read businessThink, you would say something like, well, before we go much further, let me show you all of the research our cross-functional team did that went into this before we came to that conclusion. First, we looked at blah, 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 right? So that is an immediate response. And I'm telling you, some of you listening to this old school way are like, well, what's wrong with that? Well, in this example, they seem to have experienced something that caused them to make a statement as if it was a fact. And this usually comes packed with emotion and ego, but you don't know if their belief behind the statement is accurate and complete. So you business think to explore the experience that led to the position. So here's how you would tackle that. That may well be an important issue that would keep us from expanding, but what specifically makes no sense? I mean, let's imagine we weren't in chaos here domestically. What would you want instead? What would have to happen before you're comfortable expanding and moving forward, right? So asking questions rather than making statements, especially combating statements that are absolute, like the one made earlier where it says, it absolutely makes no sense to expand globally at all. Something like that. That sounds like an absolute statement. Your answer should never be to respond with another absolute statement to combat that. When language is used as a weapon of ego, you can use language as a tool to move beyond the barriers ego tries to create. The next time you're in a meeting or a conference call or a strategy session, listen carefully to the language. Make sure you have checked your own ego at the door. As a matter of fact, don't merely check it at the door because it could still sneak back in. Check it as in hockey, hard, against the boards. Take the 2-minute penalty if you have to. When you hear ego, deal with it tactfully and gracefully. Neutralizing ego and exploring options will give you and your company a chance to come up with the best solution, not just the ones that are possible because you can't get beyond the dysfunction of ego. Solutions that create superb business results require moving beyond ego. So embrace humility. And that is it for rule number 1. So, I'm gonna move a little bit quicker through the next 3 rules, rule number 2, 3, and 4. And this episode will be part 1 of my review on this book. We will be then tackling part 2 with the last 4 rules, which has a lot of really good information. So let's talk about rule number 2, which is create curiosity. All right. Why is it important to have curiosity in our jobs as solution architects? Well, curiosity is the driving force behind business thinking. Humility clears the path to solutions, and curiosity provides the motivation to find them. All great performers, regardless of their field of expertise, seem to have it. Often, their genius is credited to good DNA, but we believe the true essence of their greatness is a skill that can be refined. Every company starts with an idea, and every idea started with someone who was curious. Without an intense desire to dig deeper or to dig deep into underlying issues, complex problems will rarely be solved, and neither will simple ones. Without curiosity, people walk past opportunities to make their companies better. Curiosity shows a willingness to look beyond past experience and consider the past, present, and future. Curiosity is what allows people to bring flexibility and improvement to things that are stale, rigid, and unchanging, and structured to chaos that serves nobody. Curiosity in businessThink is discipline and has a very specific intent to create a solution that exactly meets the company's needs. Remember that. Curiosity in businessThink is discipline and has a very specific intent to create a solution that exactly meets the company's needs. Connect form or structure to your curiosity, and it will pay big time dividends. The good news is that being investigative by nature isn't held in reserve for the playful or the creative types. It's not stashed away for the people in product development or owned by an ad agency. It's for everyone. Digging deep for the right answers is the spirit of exploration. Creating curiosity will give you the tools to explore new options, open minds, and create an atmosphere or culture of asking, well, what if? Or those what if questions that get to the heart of the matter. It will give you insights into your business you haven't considered before. Become a vital source of more great ideas and leverage the intellectual diversity and power of thinking in your company. So, one big thing that you have to have as a solution architect and as an entrepreneur and as a whatever is curiosity. And that is one thing that I think in big part I was born with. I'm just a very curious person. I really want to learn how everything works. And, I've talked about this before, that I've gone in factory tours of customers that it really didn't help at all on, the actual project or the solution that I implemented. It was just me trying to learn how things worked. I was just curious about the whole thing. So because of that, I've been, again, in factory tours and had great conversations with people that along the years that kind of opened my eyes on how some of the industries out there worked, even though the actual solution didn't incorporate any of that information. But still, it's important, I think, information to gain, for myself, just me being curious. Now, the book talks about what you do know could hurt you. And this is what it says. It might surprise you, but what you currently know often gets in the way of what you need to know. But don't. It serves as a filter that can limit curiosity in you and others. The knowledge you gain from your experiences and learning leads to beliefs. When you think you know something, it's easy to get sucked into thinking that there is no longer a need to slow down and ask questions or consider other viewpoints. That's where the problems begin. The passion and grip with which we hold onto beliefs blocks curiosity. So we have been talking about this, right? If you know that curiosity is super important in order to come up with solutions, or in order at least to spot problems so we can come up with solutions, letting beliefs get into the system are actually a detriment to your own curiosity, to your own ability to come up with solutions. Back to the book. Balance your own limited views with the perspective of others. Curiosity, like business, is a verb, not a noun. You won't be curious sitting at your desk. You need to leave, change environments, investigate, dig, search. Curiosity says, I don't know and I'm dying to find out. In other words, ask, wonder, question, ponder, speculate, hypothesize. Think. If Roger Bannister had not asked the curious question, why has no one been able to break the 4-minute mile? He also wouldn't have asked, what do I have to do to break that barrier? Instead, curiosity is vital to high performance. If you don't have boundless curiosity, you will be far less successful in business thinking, also in solution architecture, by the way, or anything else for that matter. Curiosity says, wake up. It's simply that important, and it's simply not that common. You need that edge, and it's an edge only curiosity can deliver. Great stuff. Let's talk about rule number 3. Rule number 3, I think at this point we've been obviously talking about kind of the beginning of it. We talked about checking your ego at the door. We're talking about how important curiosity is, or rule number 2, which is create curiosity. But now we're talking about what is the best way to come up with a solution. And believe it or not, rule number 3 is interesting because rule number 3 is move off the solution. The definitive outcome of business thinking is a rock solid, near perfect solution. That's what we're going for. That's what we're trying to implement as solution architects too. We want an effective solution. We want a near perfect solution. However, solution has become an overhyped, mind-numbing buzzword. The word solution is being preached from every business pulpit, and we've now lost touch with what the word really means. Everyone has solutions and lays claim to the phrase solution provider. The question is, do solutions mean results? Man, that is such a good question. And that is why, I struggle sometimes with people that call themselves solution architects, because they think that because they implemented all of the things that are on a functional spec document, they have created a solution. No. Does your solution mean results? Because that is the only way I evaluate the success of a solution. And if today's episode had kind of the most important statement of the episode, I think it would be this. And if you're taking notes, I would like for you to write this down. And if you're a solution architect, I want you to write this down and put it on your cubicle, on your office, at your house, whatever it is that you do your work, like I did. So here we go. A solution is worthless unless and until it creates business value, until it prevents a problem or invents a new result the business needs. Otherwise, a solution is merely an event. How many people out there are event architects, not solution architects? And I'll repeat this statement again in case you're taking notes, so you don't have to rewind. A solution is worthless unless and until it creates business value, until it prevents a until it prevents a problem or invents a new result the business needs. Otherwise, a solution is merely an event. Now, it might be a cool, entertaining, funded, even event, but it's still only an event. And events amount to nothing but costs. Events, cleverly disguised as real solutions, are the false gods people worship at the altar of business. That's what the book says. And I feel like I could finish this episode just with a statement because it's so powerful. And I think that if I was selecting or if I was picking, I was on that committee putting together the solution architect kind of training and exams, I would be so heavily focused on making sure that we're implementing solutions rather than events. And events are a huge enemy, right? A huge enemy for implementations in Dynamics 365 and a huge enemy for business out there. Now, let's talk about, understanding, because in order for me to create a solution, I need to understand what is it that I'm being told or what is it that is being requested from us as implementers, in the solution. So back to the book. When communicating, listen carefully to the keywords or phrases people use, and then ask what those words mean to them. It is astounding how often they will come back with something very useful and valuable, but different from what you expected. Slow down and listen. Don't blow past the words and guess. For example, if you were in the information technology department and a division manager came to you and asked if you could help them with knowledge management, wouldn't you be tempted to prove how smart you were? And again, this is your ego acting, and launch into your technical expertise about what you could do for them rather than giving in to the temptation. Don't guess about what the person means by knowledge management. So here's an example. Colleague says, our division needs to leverage all our data with a powerful, robust knowledge management system. Do you guys do that? And depending on who you work for and depending on where you are, typically the answer sounds like this. Absolutely. Absolutely. The infrastructure we have been putting into place is as robust as anything you'd ever want or need. Man, can you extrapolate this into the Power Platform or what? I mean, this sounds like a textbook answer from an event architect, not a solution architect, right? But the way we need to think about it is it's a little bit different. I mean, you can still say that it's possible. And in the book, it says, we do. And interestingly enough, every department we help usually has a different sense of what that means. Do you mind if I ask, when you say knowledge management, what are all you including in your definition? Like, what do you mean when you say that? So you're still accepting that you can do it, especially if you're working with something like the Power Platform. We know that we can create pretty much any solution, but it's always good to ask for clarification. Don't just assume. I see this all the time. I even see it when I'm working with companies and there's a project and someone asks a question about Dynamics 365 or the Power Platform and somebody else answers, like you saw in the example before, absolutely, we can do it. So, well, I mean, do we even know what they're talking about yet? Here's another example. A colleague says, I think we need to put together a team for finding new ways of enhancing client value by increasing our sources of market differentiation. Whoa. Like that statement sounds so broad, right? But old school answer will say something like, yep, definitely. In fact, that could help us leverage our competitive advantage now that I think about it and drive it even further through line extending some of our brands. Well, if you're a businessThink professional, a solution architect, you would say something like, when you say enhancing client value, what does that mean in the context of what you're thinking we need to accomplish? What in your mind specifically needs to be differentiated? And again, not being combative, just really curious, right? Remember, that is rule number 2. I'm being curious about what you mean by saying enhancing client value. What does that mean, right? And now that you hear that explanation from them, you're no longer guessing, right? And now that you're not guessing about the meaning, and neither are they get a chance to explain themselves and think about what they're trying to achieve as a business division. And you get the opportunity to learn more. Instead of mutual mystification, you get mutual understanding. Rather than mutually guessing, mutually explore beliefs and assumptions. Of course, that's not easy. The more you simply and consistently guess, the more you're assuming while also validating their own assumptions, and all assumptions on both sides may be wrong. So the more you get it right in the past, the more you keep guessing, and then you say, okay, I got it, and then you got it, cool. All right, I'm going to start working on it, and then by the time you get to the end of the solution, you hear something like, this is not what I thought I was going to get. Man, when you hear that as a solution architect, I haven't heard it in a couple years, or in a few years, I would say, maybe about 6 or 7 last time I heard this, but it's crushing to a solution architect. Even if you're getting paid to do the job, the fact that your customer looks at your solution and says, this is not what I thought I was going to get, that's just crushing. And that is why assumptions are so dangerous. Back to the book. Assumptions are another brand of guessing. They are particularly insidious because they often happen unconsciously. You don't even realize you're guessing. So, as an exercise, examine the possible assumptions of the very word solution in this phrase. Here's the phrase. We need a solution to the problem. That's it, right? We need a solution to the problem. Super simple phrase. Now let's go over some of the assumptions that you're making just by hearing we need a solution to the problem. How many times have you been in projects and somebody makes a statement like, we're struggling with cross-team collaboration. We absolutely need a solution to the problem, right? And you immediately say, I got it, Microsoft Teams, or whatever it is that you're the first thing that comes to your head, right? But let's talk about the assumptions on a phrase just like that. Remember, we need a solution to the problem is the phrase. So let's go over a list. Let's list about 10 of them. Number 1, well, you're immediately assuming that the problem is real, that it exists, that it hasn't gone away or wasn't an illusion in the first place. So you're immediately saying, it's like, well, this problem seems legit. It's true. You're also assuming that there's only one problem. Several different problems are intertwined. You're also assuming that it is possible to solve the problem. You're also assuming that the problem has only one solution. You're also assuming that having this problem is bad and having a solution would be good. You're also assuming that people care about finding a solution to the problem. You're also assuming that we can measure the extent of the problem, that different people perceive the problem in the same way, that it is possible to determine if the solution is valid, that the solution would solve the entire problem, that the cost of the solution is less than the cost of the problem, that the solution wouldn't cause more problems or even a worse problem, that the solution will be valid over time. Your Microsoft Team solution, or a few years ago, it would have been Yammer. How valuable would that be today? Right? So by saying something simple, like we need a solution to the problem, there are so many assumptions we can make from that phrase. If you just take that and start to work, essentially, if you just take that and start implementing a solution, start thinking about it. But in order to create an effective solution, you need to focus on the pain, right? And bringing clarity and definition to the issues. So I'll give you an example. Let's say your colleague says, I think we need to implement a company-wide project management software system. All right? Now you, who has been listening to this episode and hopefully has read the book, businessThink, you will say something like, you know what? That could definitely be a big need here. Now with the recent downsizing, that's probably a great idea. At a high level, what are all of the issues you hope that this, project management software would address? Right? Just opening it up for discussion, understanding what is it that they're looking for. Now, with patience and discipline, you may get a list that looks something like, missed deadlines, for example, increased development costs, low morale, improved time to market, standard approach and language for managing projects. We've had unhappy customers in the past, and again, the idea is you're trying to pull, what are some of those issues that you hope this software would address. And that is a good list of issues. But even though you get a list of 6 things, like we just talked about, missed deadlines, increased development costs, low morale, unhappy customers, all that stuff, you need to make sure that your list is complete. Back to the book. In identifying the business issues, you want to make sure the list of underlying business issues is complete before you dive into any one particular issue. You might check to make sure it's complete by saying something like this. Hey, let's take a look at the list of issues we have. If we could make major progress against these goals and nothing else, would we have the real solution, or is anything else missing? Like if we tackle these 6 things, can we say that that's it? That's the solution that we need? Now, if they have other ideas, you just add them to the list. You will often find that one of the last issues added to the list is actually the most important issue on the list. This happens all the time, by the way, in projects. People start thinking like, and then they come up with something that it ends up being like the most important thing on the list. Back to the book. It takes a while for people's minds to engage a subject, so be patient in letting the issues unfold until the list is complete. Better to exercise patience now rather than having a vital issue rise up later, only to wipe out the whole investment that you've made in the project. It is hard to wait. Balance your need to speed with patience. If you aren't patient, you don't get a complete list and you run 2 risks. Number 1, you will end up using valuable time and energy talking about an issue that is not even the most critical business issue. You also may be duped into thinking that it is the most important issue, right? You spend all this time working on something, you're thinking that is the most important thing. It's not even close. Even if you finally make your way to the most important issue, you will have wasted a bunch of time and money getting there. If you do get a second chance, the cost of not solving the issues will have grown because you just spent a bunch of time and money, trying to solve a problem that shouldn't even be solved, right? It shouldn't even be there. All right, let's tackle the last rule for this episode, rule number 4. And like I mentioned, we will cover the last 4 rules on part 2, which is the next episode of the CRM MVP podcast. Rule number 4 is getting evidence, or get evidence. And this is super important for all of us solution architects out there when it comes to implementing a solution that is effective, or a solution that will be implemented by the organization and adopted by the users. In the book, quote, "If you don't have evidence, there is no reason to do anything. Period. Without valid data, accurate and complete assessments of problems or opportunities becomes virtually impossible. No one will care about a fast, irrelevant solution. Getting evidence will give you the tools to get proof that a problem or an opportunity in fact exists, and to get a clear understanding of what it looks like or will look like in the future. For each priority issue, you will collect soft evidence, then convert the soft evidence into hard evidence that the business can measure. It is the next critical step in helping you define whether something is a could or a should and go on to build a solid business case. Okay, so let's talk about, you just heard me talk about soft evidence and hard evidence, or taking soft evidence and converting it into hard evidence, because again, as I mentioned, there's basically two levels of evidence. Level one, which is called the soft evidence, is what we call descriptive or circumstantial or anecdotal or subjective or something like that, right? And I'll give you some examples of that. When you're talking to customers, when you're talking to people in implementations, their evidence sounds something like this. People seem confused about our priorities, or there's no teamwork in our department, or people don't trust management, or our salespeople complain they don't have remote access when they're on the road. How many times have you heard that? I mean, if I ask to raise your hand if you've heard that before, you're all going to raise your hand in the bus, in the metro, and things like that. People are going to think you're weird. But I mean, come on. I have to think that everyone who's a functional consultant or solution architect in Dynamics that has implemented a solution for sales has heard that before. Our brand is weakening. Well, what does that mean? It's just soft evidence, right? It's anecdotal. It's subjective. Morale is low and the company culture is negative. We need coaching and training reinforcement. Our products and services are undervalued. Management doesn't trust us. Is that what they want, that solution? Management doesn't trust us. We're top heavy and bureaucratic. We lack strategic direction, right? Those are some examples of soft evidence. And back to the book. Soft evidence is the subjective, anecdotal, qualified layer of data on top. And hard evidence is the quantified, measured, validated foundation or bedrock beneath. Because not all evidence is created equal, there is reason evidence is in this sequence. The first level, or the soft evidence, is the easiest one to find and the most common. People, can safely and quickly give you this type of evidence from their own experience, from what they have seen or observed, even if it's happening only in their department or division. They will tell you stories or give you, the word on the street, instances of evidence. Soft evidence allows for divergent opinion, right? Which is usually their opinion. Unique perspective, which is usually theirs as well, and a local functional sense of what is going on according to them. Usually, a healthy amount of soft evidence naturally leads to the deeper second level, which is hard evidence. Soft evidence without the validation and verification of hard evidence can deceive people into thinking that they have done their homework and that they're actually solving something. Nobody ends up having to prove anything, and so many ideas get funded irrationally. Ultimately, you're digging and drilling for hard evidence. That is what we're after. Now, what is hard evidence? Right? What is hard evidence? Hard evidence is the stuff that we can measure or that can be verified by data and is definitely harder to find. So when it comes to soft evidence, things like there's no teamwork in our department, well, let's talk about product defects, right? And returns, for example, and how the no teamwork is increasing returns and product defects. Or when people think about we need more collaboration and better communication between divisions, well, maybe let's see how our speed to market has dropped off, for example, or how we can improve it if we could solve that problem. We need coaching and training. Well, why is that? Let's look at customer satisfaction numbers. You are trying always to find hard data, essentially, on these. So when you think about, for example, soft evidence and how you can ask the right questions to pull the hard data or the hard evidence behind, the level 2 evidence behind. Here are some examples of questions you can ask. For example, they always start with how or what, by the way. So here's a couple of examples of how questions. Well, how will we know if we improve brand loyalty? For example, for the person complaining or the group complaining about brand loyalty. How do we know we need to reorganize, by the way? How specifically is poor leadership showing up? People say, we don't trust leadership or leadership is poor or whatever it is. Well, how is that showing up? How do we become convinced the client trust is eroding? The client trust is getting worse. How do we know that? And probably that can give you the hard evidence you need to compare, right? How client or customer feedback is getting worse year after year or whatever it is. How specifically would we measure our ability to recruit and keep top talent? Those are some questions that you can ask to try to get that hard evidence. When it comes to the what questions, what specifically will we consider success if we expand our product line? So somebody complaining about how we don't have enough products or whatever it is. What will we observe that will let us know morale has improved? What specifically let us know quality is down? How do we know that? People say, well, quality is way down. Well, how? What specifically tells us that quality is down? What convinces us that our competitors have superior services? For example, everyone thinks that our competitors are doing better or have better services. Well, what is that? And probe that. And perhaps the answer to the question will still be soft evidence, but you can continue to ask, the why and try to get to the hard evidence. What specifically makes us think we need to add an e-commerce functionality to our website, right? What is that? You're trying to look for hard evidence, and perhaps the answer hopefully will come back and say, well, if you look at opportunities and the way we lost them, customers have indicated that we don't have a social person, whatever it is. You can actually get the evidence that you need to be able to implement a solution against it, or at least to make a business case for why that solution is important. Back to the book. As I mentioned before, hard evidence is measured or verified data. It is harder to find. In every organization, there are things that are important to the business that are regularly measured. These can be goals or targets against which people are often expected to perform, and they are frequently operational in nature. They commonly show up in the company's strategic initiatives, profit and loss statements, or in a corporate scorecard. Hard evidence is the most powerful form of evidence because it leads to the impact on the business and its people. And every effort should be made to state the impact in financial terms that relate to the strategies and performance of the company. Money will become the acid test that moves could to the Holy Grail should. Now, some examples on how you can take the pain, which is that soft evidence that you're getting, and through the questions and the answers you get from those questions that we evaluated before, dig for gain. So the key phrase, back to the book, when digging for hard evidence on the gain side is, what should that allow us to do that we can do as a business today? That is a super important question. I ask that question all the time in projects. So what is it that this solution is going to do for us that we can do today? Well, today we can really track our prototypes to how many business we win by having a whole team creating prototypes for our prospects. Cool. That's a good answer. And let's go back and analyze the data, right? To find out and how we can improve on that. So you can know whether you're digging for gain. Listen carefully to what people say they want. They will tell you their primary motivation through key phrases that will cue you to dig in for gain. These may include things like, the objectives we are striving for are too high, too low, too whatever. We're looking to accomplish XYZ. Our targets in the future are, that's another, flag. In an ideal world, blah, blah, blah. Like you've heard that before, right? The improvements we're expecting to achieve are, insert the rest of the comment here. Those are some of the flags that you want to hear when you're looking for gain. While you may pause to ask some soft evidence questions along the way for context, your focus should be on what they said and what they wanted by asking things like, well, what does that allow you to do that you can do today, as we mentioned before? You can definitely vary how you ask that question, by the way. Things like, what does that do for you? Or what does that get you? Right? Where do the benefits of that show up? How does that impact performance? How does that help gain? How does that help the bottom line? Best case scenario, what will be the ultimate gain? And so on. The key is to keep cutting away layers until you get to something that is a key business driver. Here's an example. A colleague says, what we really need here is better communication between engineering and manufacturing. Cool. Soft evidence. Pain, right? You are going to respond with something like, you're probably right on. If we improve our communication, what would that allow us to do that we can't do today? Now, in this example, a colleague is asking for something they want, which is they want to gain, is that improved communication that they talked about. The businessThink responds rather than arguing the merit of how good the communication is already, which I know some of you will be like, what are you talking about? We have Microsoft Teams. You guys can communicate all you want, blah, blah, blah. Right? Instead of doing that, you are now trying to find out what getting that communication that they're talking about, that colleague is talking about, would actually allow them to do that they can do now. So that is how we dig for gain. Now, in some cases, you do want to dig for pain. Many times, you're working with people who are hoping to eliminate pain. That's all they want out of the solution. They're telling you what they don't want or where it hurts, if you want to think about it that way. They may even use words describing physical or emotional pain like, dude, it's killing us. I mean, that thing, it's killing us. Or we're bleeding. We're bleeding out talent. We're bleeding out cash. They use words like that. We have to, it's so painful when I see blah, blah, blah. What's hurting us, what's stopping us, we're concerned about blah, blah, blah. Like they're using this pain to essentially mention what is it they're looking for. Some people find it harder or more uncomfortable to explore pain. To them, talking about the wonderful things people do actually want, it's easier than delving into the depths of what people don't want. However, because people are more often motivated to move away from pain rather than to move towards gain, and it seems that there's a lot more discussion of pain than of gain in companies, you still need to get the core motivation and underlying business issues. Remember when we talked about the example with the glass? Is it half empty or half full? It's both. So that's why we need to explore the gains and the pain. So here's how you dig down for pain. The key phrase here is, and then what happens? That is the key phrase. That's all you need to remember to dig in for more pain. Again, you can vary that phrase in many ways. Things like, and what does that affect? Or, and what are the consequences of that? Or, and what does that do in turn? Or what does that in turn impact? Another one, worst case scenario, if you never change this, what will happen? Right? There's so many variants or variables in which you can ask this question. For example, if the person says, what's really killing us is not having the right people to get the right information at the right time. You cut for pain by asking, and when the right people don't get the right information at the right time, then what happens? Remember, that is the key phrase in this whole thing. And then what happens? You state what they said, and then you add, and now what? And then what happens? What happens after that? Here's an example. We're not getting one holistic view of the customer when they call in, and it's killing us. You've heard that before in projects, right? So this is how you react. That sounds frustrating. When we're not getting that view, what's happening after that? And then what happens? The colleague says something like, well, customers are getting a widely varying level of service depending on whom and where they call in within the company. And because customers are getting that, widely varying levels of service in the organization, what's showing up? Well, customers are getting frustrated and reps are ineffective. This is very, very helpful. And, this may seem like an obvious question, and it's okay, but I'll ask it anyway. When our customers are frustrated and the reps' effectiveness goes down, then what happens? Well, our product orders are going down, costing us revenue, and we're losing reps, which means turnover costs are up. Bam. That's what you were looking for. You just hit the bedrock. You just have hard evidence. You don't know how strongly it will register as impact yet, but you simply know you've hit something hard that is measurable. The measurable alert has gone off at this point. And once alerted, you use a different tool to convert the evidence from hard to actual impact. Remember that last response from the colleague says, our product orders are going down, costing us revenue, and we're losing reps, which means turnover costs are up. That is something you can actually measure. The stuff you talked about before, like, we don't have a holistic view, so it's killing us. How do you measure that? You don't know yet, right? Trying to pull those key performance indicators. It's hard with self-evidence. You need to focus on hard evidence. All right. So this is pretty awesome. Pretty awesome book. As you can see, a lot of lessons for solution architects, and that is just the first 4 rules. And I wanted to close with, again, that whole conversation about soft evidence versus hard evidence. And I always work so hard on getting to the bottom of it and not just relying on feelings rather than, actual things that I can measure and I can back up by data. On the next episode of the CRM MVP podcast, I will be tackling rules 5 through 8. So 4 more rules that are part of businessThink. I hope that some of you buy the book and it probably arrives before you listen to the next episode. But if you don't, if you'd rather listen to that and then get the book after that or read it after that, that also works. I just want to thank you for sticking up with me on this, hour and 15 minutes or so that we have been talking about this thing. As I mentioned, on the next episode, we have the last 4 rules. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, you can always reach us at info@crmmvppodcast.com. We'll see you in 2 weeks for the last 4 rules of businessThink. See you then.